Hello, and welcome to the mentorDINO YouTube channel. I'm your host, Caitlin Rossier. I am an architect and founder of mentorDINO. Each week, I interview amazing professionals in and around the architecture, engineering, and construction industry to help foster learning, growth, and inspiration in others. Thank you all to our current subscribers, and if you're new, we'd love to have you join our community. So hit subscribe. It really does help others be able to discover this resource. So let's dive in. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Welcome, everybody, to the mentorDINO podcast. I would like to welcome Luis Duque, a civil engineer from Foothills Bridge in Rapid City, South Dakota. Thank you, Luis, for taking the time to speak with me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to have this conversation.
Yeah, so you are a civil engineer. Can you let my audience know a little bit more about your experience so far and kind of your journey, your career path, and I guess education too for anybody looking to study to be a civil engineer?
Yeah, so civil engineering is actually one of the oldest fields of engineering. So we were called civil engineers because at the beginning they were civil engineers and military engineers. So those were kind of the two branches of engineering back in the day. If you think about it, civil engineers do really everything related to the public. So roads, bridges, water mains, wastewater, water treatment, basically everything that touches your day-to-day life. Civil engineers pretty much have a hand in it. Obviously, things have changed. We have a lot more technology. There's a lot more industries that help with the process, but as really basic, that's what civil engineers do. If you want to work for the public and you want to work in something that you're living in, you're driving on, anything like that, civil engineers have a good hand on that. I myself, I'm a bridge engineer, and we work on actually construction engineering, which is a little different than like bridge design. So whenever a bridge needs to be taken down, we engineer plans to have demolitions. We work a lot with contractors and state DOTs, a lot of like temporary structures and false work and form work and all that stuff that helps contractors and design engineers have a bridge that is designed for a permanent condition, but then how do you put it together and how do you do all of these kind of intermediate steps? That's what I do right now. I actually started in residential construction, so I design houses and remodels for a couple of years. So a little two different careers there, but I think at the end of the day, structural engineering is very similar depending, not regardless of where you are in your career. I mean, a stress is going to be a stress in a house, in a bridge. The magnitude and the loads are a little different, but I think the basic design concepts are very similar.
Yeah, so for a bridge, you don't need an architect, so you don't really need me for anything. But how do the civil engineer and structural engineer work together on a bridge?
So all structural engineers are civil engineers, but not all civil engineers are structural engineers.
Got
So
it.
I got my degree in civil engineering, and then I did a master's in civil engineering with a structural engineering emphasis. So structural engineering is a kind of sub branch of civil engineering. So there is transportation, structural. I think environmental kind of falls into that a little bit. You have geotech, you have hydraulics engineering. So there's a lot of different branches within civil engineering. So I am kind of a slice of that big civil engineering pie.
Gotcha. Okay. It's always learning like all the different facets on I know the positions all work, but then it's like, how do they all come together and then work together? So, now from the education side, do you have to pick one or the other right away? Or if somebody's interested in like learning about both, are they going in and starting the education at the same starting point and then kind of have to make decisions? Is that how that works?
That's a good question. You don't have to, when you graduate as a civil engineer, you have to take basically everything. So I had classes in transportation engineering, I had classes in hydraulics, wastewater treatment, water treatment. So you see everything. So you have a basic understanding of everything. Once you graduate, you decide what you want to be doing. So I went to school with people that decided they wanted to do transportation, they wanted to do water treatment. We had the same classes all up to about junior year. And I think the senior year, you have your electives. So depending on what you want to do, that's when you get to pick which ones you want to be focusing on. You still have to have some variety and seeing different branches of civil engineering, but you, for the most part, pick the ones that you're most interested in. But obviously, not a requirement. I could go and say right now, I want to switch careers and I want to be in wastewater treatment. I could do that because I'm a civil engineer. I have the background in terms of the degree. I don't have the experience, but I could find a job because that's generally just civil engineers in that area. For structures and maybe geotech, there's a little bit more of a challenge just because it's a lot more technical. So a lot of people actually get their master's degree before they start working. And I think our company almost requires it before you can get hired. So there's a lot of changes in terms of I'm sure we get into it, but education and licensing, all that stuff that it's important to know because you can make the change, but it's not going to be easy, and you probably have a not as much knowledge as someone that started from that path from the beginning. But in terms of like education and your qualifications, I think you could make the argument that as a civil engineer, you can basically work in any of the different branches.
Yeah, but it's more like at the junior level where you really have to make those decisions and then which masters you get. So you can kind of get some flavors of it
Yeah,
ahead
in
of
a
time.
sense, you probably will have to like restart your career if you're five
Yeah.
years into structures, but then you want to do something completely different, like wastewater treatment. Then you're
Yeah.
basically starting as an entry level engineer at that point. I think geotech is a little closer to structures. There's a lot of overlap. I'll say as well as transportation, but there's definitely some of them that are more kind of opposite than the others.
Yeah. And going into kind of the certification process, I know for engineers it's more of the FE, so Foundations of Engineering, and then your PE, Professional Engineering, if I get that right. What is the process for that? Do you have to have all your education done ahead of time? When can you start? How's that work for you guys?
Yeah, actually, I'm learning a little bit about that process because my brother is actually an architect and he's in the process of
Godspeed.
those exam. Yeah, so in engineering, it's not as complicated. So usually we take the FE during the senior year. Some people even take it during the junior year when they're in college. Some take it after they graduate. It doesn't really make a difference. But once you pass the FE and before you take the PE, there are as you probably can imagine, different requirements based on the state you lived in or the state you want to get licensed in. There's states that you can take the exam right away, but you cannot get the license until you have the experience.
Mm-hmm.
Some other states you can take the exam and get your license a year earlier. Usually, the more kind of standard, I would say, is 4 years after you graduate. You can count your master's as 1 year, even if it takes 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, counts like as 1 year. I think same with the PhD, you can count 1 year of experience if you get your PhD, but then you have to have at least, if you take a master's, 3 years of progressive engineering experience. I think that's the call under the license PE in the different areas you have. So as a structural engineer, I had experience with various PEs in different aspects of my career when I was switching jobs and everything that have to sign and say, hey, he was working under me. I'm a licensed professional engineer. He's ready to take the exam. I'm basically recommending him to get the license after you pass the exam. Some states, it's the reverse. You have to apply before you take the exam. So some places you pass the exam and then you apply. So depending on the state, it's best just to check with the board and understand those differences there. But after those 3 years, if you have to do masters, you take the exam, you go through the process of applying online, and you basically get your license. So it's relatively simple, with caveat that different states have different requirements and timelines.
Yeah. Now I had a fun conversation with an electrical engineer, and they actually have to really have a lot of documentation as part of that 3-year experience, whereas architects are more filling out hours and you have a supervisor approving them. How does that work for civil engineers?
It's the same. I think it's probably very standard across most engineering disciplines.
Engineering.
I don't remember how many projects, I want to say to 5 projects and have like a pretty detailed description of what was my role, what did I do, how was I progressing within the project. At the beginning, I was maybe doing 1 or 2 calculations, and I was progressing into maybe more a bigger part of the design team, showing that progressive experience and how it relates to, or how did you work close with the PE at that time that was managing the project, etc. So there's a lot of paperwork and description, and I think that if someone is just starting the process, just graduated from college, or maybe even thinking about taking the PE, just having a lot of notes and having a good record of what you did during these projects. And obviously, if you switch companies a lot, it's a good idea to keep in contact with the previous bosses and PEs, because you're going to need all that information in there. Even if you
Yeah.
don't think when you switch companies, you're never going to talk to them again. If you want to get your license in the fastest way possible, you're going to need them to sign up for you.
Yeah. And then is it for California? I know architects have an additional exam for anybody who wants to be licensed in the state of California. I'm assuming there's additional requirements for anybody looking at that particular state.
Yes, California, you can get your license actually 3 years instead of 4. And you have to take an additional exam, or I think it's technically 2 exams, a seismic and a surveying exam. So a little bit of extra work, but I don't think that's a ton more. I think a lot of our company employees used to travel to California because you could get a license a year.
So you don't have to necessarily be licensed within the state that you're living in necessarily.
No,
And for your company, are you guys working on more local projects, or are you guys?
we're a very small consulting firm. We're only about 18 engineers, I think, right now. It's not very big, maybe a little less than that. But most of our work is actually out of state. We have a few projects in Colorado, which is where the base office is, the headquarters, if you will. I live in South Dakota, like you mentioned. I work fully remote. But we have projects in California, Texas, Maine. We have had a few in Canada. We had a project in Peru a few years ago. So we have projects a lot all over the US, which is always kind of fun if you get to do those site visits and travel a little bit.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about your experience about being a fully remote engineer? I know architects, it's a big discussion between hybrid and fully remote and just collaborating with a team and how that's changed. How's that for your experience?
Yeah, I think engineers is probably very similar. I think COVID probably helped a lot because we were working remote. I started in 2020, February of 2020, so I was basically remote since day one at this new company. So that's all I knew for a couple of years. And I wouldn't say there's a big difference. I would say it's maybe more lonely and you feel more like away from everyone else. You still kind of get to communicate with them. You have meetings, but you don't have that like connection on day-to-day conversations as if we were in the office. I typically try to go 4 times a year to the office for a week, just kind of a part of kind of the requirements that we have at our company. But at the same time, you still feel kind of that disconnect at times if you're not kind of proactively reaching out to people, asking questions, and obviously there's a lot more communication that goes into it that I didn't quite expect coming into it, but I knew I was going to have to work a little harder to communicate better, to understand design and those kind of technical stuff that goes into it. But at the end of the day, I think we have the tools and the resources to be able to do this. I mean, we did it. Our company was pretty much fully remote for a full year, and we had a great year. We didn't really see a slowdown in terms of productivity and everything. I think the fact that I can be home, I can take a 30-minute break, go have lunch with my family, and feel re-energized for the afternoon instead of just maybe having lunch quick at my desk and keep going for the day. So they're straight off, but I think there's a lot of positive as well that it's important to note.
Yeah. And how many years of experience did you have when you went fully remote? Because it's kind of the other questions I get from a lot of young professionals of there are opportunities out there to be fully remote starting out. And I'm always hesitant because it's a little bit easier to explain when you're sitting next to somebody. So like where were you in your career journey so far, or years of experience whenever you did that switch?
Yeah, so this switch happened when, let's say, that was last year to 2020. No,
It's like, what
2020,
year is it now? Everything kind of blends together.
2024. We're in a new year. So I guess 2 years ago, 2022 was when we made the move in September. Um, I graduated from college in 2018, so December 2018. So I had 19, 20, 21, 3 years. So 4 years, because I got my license that same year in 2021. I'll say 4 or 5 years. I think that's kind of where I was at. I had already had my P license, so I wasn't like completely new to engineering. I had some knowledge. This was year 2 at this company, so I wasn't like completely new to the company, which I think it's
Hmm.
also very important. Um, but I will say when I started in 2020, I only had 2.5, maybe 3 years of experience. I was maybe within a year or so to getting my P license, and we were fully remote. That's all I knew basically from this company, and I was trained and had to, as thousands of people did, millions of people did during COVID, can adjust to that as well. So I wouldn't say it's impossible. It's going to require a motivated person to really want to do it, and I think the load in terms of training and all of that stuff is going to fall on the individual rather than the company. They're just going to sit back and expect the company to train them, to be on their shoulder and looking after them. That's not going to be successful. I think that if you want to be working remote, you need to be the one with the initiative to ask questions, look for resources, and be a little more proactive than you are just at the office.
Yeah, because when you're in the office, things by accident happen. But to make sure you're connected, like you said, when you started, you were very proactive
Mhm.
on reaching out to people so you feel connected.
And I think, yeah, like you said, just having those connections. It's hard when you're remote. It's harder when you start remote because you don't really have that time that you're spending in the office walking around. You go grab water, you gotta grab coffee, and someone is there, and you have a 5 minute chat. Um, I think our company did a good job, especially during COVID, to try to do like outdoor activities, go on hikes, have company barbecues, things like that to get us all together. And I think that helped a lot for me, especially since I started remote.
Yeah. And I think it just takes more time. I started at um, Smith Group right around the same time you started remote. So it was like, I was only in the office for a month and then all of a sudden COVID hit. And I have some really close relationships because I had a longer term project during that time. And it probably just took a little bit longer to build those relationships. But now, like, I feel like I could call them in a heartbeat or we could go on a vacation together. Like, we're close
Definitely.
in that sense. And it just probably took a little bit longer. But
Yeah, it's just again putting the effort and
yep.
hopefully you get to work with different people in different projects and not just kind of one team because you'll get to know that team really well, but if you don't work with others, it's going to be more challenging.
Yeah, definitely. Shifting back into the actual bridge engineer part, what are some challenges of your position?
I will say one of the biggest challenges would be that there is not really a code that we can follow for a lot of this stuff. We're working with pretty old structures. We are making them do things that they were not designed to do a lot of times when you're taking them down. Um, and the codes that we have are mainly for designing new structures with new materials, with all that comes with that. So that's probably the biggest challenge, is knowing that, and honestly, that's a lot of the best part of what we do, just not having a prescriptive approach. We can be a little more creative and design demolition plans that don't really follow a code. We're just kind of using our engineering knowledge and the basics of stresses and deflections and forces and such that putting it all together makes sense to us as we analyze the structure in a way that maybe wasn't meant to be analyzed in the first place.
Yeah, so for older bridges, like I'm reflecting back on architecture, sometimes we have existing drawings to go off of, and other times we have to do our own investigation to figure out what's there. But I'm not doing as bigger structures like a bridge. So do you guys typically have drawings for these bridges or If not, how do you guys investigate to figure out what's on the inside?
Typically, we have drawings, and if they're a big structure, they typically have material properties. So we have that. I think the bigger challenge is making sure we have a solid inspection report just to make sure the damage of the structure being in service for 50, 60 years or more hasn't deteriorated the member enough that we should be considered and we can make the analysis assuming the full kind of sectional properties and everything. So we typically have the plans. We are able to like lay it out in a model, do the calculations and everything with a close attention to those inspection reports, or we even go out there and make some inspection on some critical members and get that information that way. There are testing if you don't have the material properties. So I mean, there's testing for steel, concrete that can determine that. But typically, if it's a big bridge, a big project, we have that information.
Do you guys do inspections of bridges within your company?
Um,
I don't know how that is legally or insurance, if that
I
has to be done. But
I don't think it has to be someone qualified. We will do them for like projects we're working on. I don't think we go out there and do them for other people. But I'm not sure. I think it's mainly just if we have a project and we need to verify something, we go out there and do the inspection.
Yeah. No, Pittsburgh's the city of bridges, and the latest one that fell and just collapsed, it was just like, oh, how is bridge design? How is it coming together? Who's looking at it? So it sparked my interest in terms of curiosity side.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of moving parts and a lot of people involved in the process. I mean, if you think of an engineering team and the contractor that goes through the process, the owner that does the review, they usually have an engineer, kind of an independent reviewer. So there's a lot of pieces in the process, but every now and then there's stuff that falls through the cracks and doesn't get caught in time or was just neglected in the process, and that's when we have those incidents.
Yep, we're humans. You never know. When planning for demoing a bridge, I know for architects, I pretty much can just note demo and I just have to give them scope on what the material is so the contractor can price it. But I don't really talk about means and methods of how they are to demo it. Are you explaining to them how to demo a bridge because of the structure nature of it? How does that work?
Yeah, so we don't do the means and methods. We give them kind of a series of steps to do it. So do this first. Make sure you don't take out this member before you take this other member out. Pick it in these points. But beyond that, it's kind of up to the contractor to decide on the means and methods. So we give them like the roadmap,
the milestones,
right? We
type
give them like
thing.
the roadmap and making sure that the information is clear and we have checked all the conditions. And if they follow that same path and connect where they need to be connected and cut where they need to be cut, everything will be safe. Most of the times, how they do it, it's mainly up to the contractor to do.
Then switching gears a little bit, I know you have your own website, Engineering Our Future. Can you talk a little bit on how you started that and what you're doing with that platform?
Yeah, so Engineer Our Future really started as a podcast in 2020. I have always really wanted to do a podcast for some reason. Maybe it was kind of the time it was back then, but I've been volunteering with AACE for a long time, and I usually get questions from international students mainly on how to come to the US, how to apply for jobs, how to craft a resume, all these things that we are not really taught in school. And I just thought it would be interesting to have a platform where I can talk to the other engineers that I have figured out and learn from them. And honestly, I was learning as much as anyone else listening to the podcast. So it was kind of a win-win for everyone. I started in 2020. In 2021 is kind of when I started to get a little more serious on it. Kind of the website came to be a little better. I started doing some courses to prepare for the PE and the FE exam, just based on my experience. And some things kind of popped from there, some coaching and some other stuff. But mainly has been a way for me to share what I'm learning, talk with other engineers, and hopefully just share some of this information that I think is really cool to share with others, how career development works. I'm sure in 5-10 years I'll be talking about other things as my career progresses. And I think that's kind of why I wanted to name it Engineering Our Future, because I am kind of part of the process of learning this as well. I'm not trying to help other people to do it themselves. It's just sharing my experience, talk with other people, and hopefully everyone as a community can grow together.
Yeah. No, because that's what I love about talking to people. And I reach out to everyone in the AEC industry. So I love learning. Like, I've learned so much on being a bridge engineer that a year ago I probably would have had no idea I was going to be talking to you. So
Yeah, and the best part is when I mean, you probably have noticed this. You're sitting in your office, your bedroom, wherever you record your podcast and everything. You record something you think is great, you put it out, people listen to it, but you never really hear much beyond that. And sometimes I feel lonely. And
mhm.
when I started going back to conferences, it was really cool when people would approach me like, "Oh, hey, I listened to your podcast. It's pretty cool. I listened to this episode and really found it interesting. Here's what I learned." I'm like, okay, nobody's. I feel like isolated, but at the same time,
Yeah.
when I go to these places, I meet people that listen to the podcast and enjoy it, and that's really the best feeling you can get when you're doing something like this.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree because, I'm in my office, but it's not until I go out to different industry events and like locally people know who I am. But I was at a conference up in Boston and they were like, "Oh, you're the dino girl." And I'm like, "Oh, marketing works. Like everybody knows me for my dinosaur guy, so it works for me." But then finding out like conversations, I did a series on my YouTube channel, What an Architect Does, based on different design phases. And I actually had product reps reach out to me and say, "Thank you. This is actually really helpful so we can understand how you work." And I'm like, "Oh, I thought I was teaching like students in architecture on what we do, and not knowing how many different facets and other people discover it is kind of fun, but you
That's
never know."
the beauty of just putting information out there. You never know who you're gonna reach, and honestly, the opportunities that come with it's a lot of fun as well.
Yeah, and meeting people around the country, I think, is probably the other part of podcasting that's been really fun. And just, I've talked to people in a number of different states.
Yeah, and honestly, I mean, one of the things that I tell students is just growing the network and making sure you're connecting with other people. And the amount of people I know through the podcast, because I was honestly a little afraid, but not too afraid to ask them to come to the podcast, has been amazing. And I still stay in touch with a lot of people that I have interviewed. When I go to conferences, people know that I have a podcast, and they try to share with other people at the conference. I've been invited to be part of committees. I was invited to go to a conference last year for the podcast. Um, things are the things that open for you when you start sharing that information, and just being more out there talking to people. And you don't have to have a podcast to talk to someone on LinkedIn and network and everything, but if you do it more, you're going to start expanding the network, and you never know when you're going to need it. Even if they're outside your industry, you never know when that person can help you find your next job, your next connection, help you in something in your career. So I enjoy networking as much as an engineer can enjoy it, I should say. I am very introverted still, but I understand the purpose and the benefit of doing some good networking.
Yeah, or even just being a guest on a podcast, or if there's someone that I talk to that's fascinating or that you talk to, you can always reach out to either one of us and we can give you their contact information. Everyone I've had on has just been very open. If anybody wants to ask any additional questions or find out more, they've all been open books to help
Yeah,
somebody find their
absolutely.
path.
Yeah, and I've had people come back to the podcast. I met some great friends through it, and just the other day I was talking with a guy called Jeff Perry. I don't know if you've seen him on LinkedIn. He just released a book called Intentional Engineering. I think I had it somewhere here. I was reading it the other day. He sent me a copy. We chatted about it. We had a lot of fun, and I met him through LinkedIn and see him on LinkedIn. Ask him to call to the podcast. I've been on his podcast. He's been on mine, I think 2 or 3 times at this point. But that's how you create those
Mhm.
connections. You just talk to people. And honestly, just being interested in what others are doing as well. Like I'm not the greatest communicator. I don't know public speaking is probably not my thing, even though I have been doing a podcast for a few years now and it got a lot better. But I can tell you who in the industry is a great public speaker who has a lot of skills in that, and I can go talk to them and learn more about that specific skill if I'm trying to learn something.
Yeah, definitely. Now I know you've also had experience with Engineers Without Borders. Can you explain what you did with that and what opportunities are over there?
Yeah, so Engineers Without Borders, if you're not familiar with it, is a nonprofit organization, I think based in Denver, if I remember correctly. They have projects globally. They have different offices abroad as well. Their main purpose is just to bring, I think most of the projects are safe drinking water projects, but they're projects as simple as just building maybe a little house for someone in a community, or as large as like a school in a community that has been maybe devastated, don't have a system. But most of the projects, I believe, a good quantity is just water problems, which is a huge problem, obviously, in the world that they're trying to solve. And a lot of these people are volunteers. Most of them are students. There's a lot of engineers and professional engineers that are part of it, that travel to these countries and do the implementations a lot of times themselves with the communities. And I think the cool part is you don't just go there and build this water system and just leave. You're with the community before, listening to their ideas, their needs. You implement the projects, you train them how to maintain it, you check on them for a couple of years after that. So hopefully you are empowering them to use these systems and learn how to fix it if something was wrong, teach them how it works, and all of that. And all the materials are from the area, so you're not bringing anything from the US that you're not going to be able to find in these places. So it's a very cool organization. I volunteered a lot when I was a student and a little bit after I graduated. They also have a lot of projects here in the US. They partner with AWWA, the American Water Works Association, and ASCE, the American Society of Civil Engineers. A lot of letters in
So
there,
many
but
letters.
the cool part is you get to work in communities that you live in. Obviously, the projects are a little different. There are different needs here in the US than there are in Bolivia or in Africa. But the cool part is you get to do a little engineering and help people along the way. I was just talking with someone from Engineers Reporters the other day, and they need a structural engineer in Arizona to help with a project. And I was like, that sounds cool. I want to be part of that. And they usually have teams, again, growing the network from all over the US that come together and collaborate in these. And we're just volunteers trying to um, help these communities. And I think that's a great use of my time as well. And I've been doing it for, I want to say 10 years now. And it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah. What countries have you gotten to go to?
As a student, we went to Bolivia a couple times. So that's really the only country I've been to. I was mentoring the CU Boulder chapter when I was down in Boulder, and we traveled to Puerto Rico. And I've done a project here in South Dakota as well, and a project locally in Colorado too.
Okay. And you had mentioned also that you had a bunch of foreign engineers asking you questions on kind of coming from other countries and coming to the States. What's some typical advice that you've given them?
Oh, it depends so much.
I have learned through the foreign architects group that it's very much dependent on the country, your education, how far you've gotten, if you're licensed in another country versus not licensed. So there's so many different things. Or if there's a good resource from the engineering side that you typically point people to.
I think the main question I get is I want to come to US and work in the US, and that tells me very little of what they want to do. So I just need to ask a few more questions in terms of like what they want to do with their career. Do they want to be a bridge engineer? They want to design? They want to be in the construction side? Where in the United States they want to be? Because that affects tremendously the licensing process. In general, if people want to get their license, is the best to know where they're going and ask the board of that state what the requirements are. So the main requirement, like I said, it was 4 years of progressive engineering experience under a PE. Most internationals won't have that because there are not a lot of internationals that maybe they do work at a company in the US and they have that experience under a PE. The other requirement that obviously goes hand in hand with that is graduating from university here in the United States. Most of the universities are accredited by the ABED. I do not remember what that those letters mean, but what it means is they are approved by the NCES, so the board of that gives the license, to count as a valid education. A lot of the international universities don't have that accreditation. Some of them do and make the process a lot easier.
Mm-hmm.
But if they don't, you either need to submit the transcripts and have them like manually approve it, or you just need to have more experience. So instead of 4 years of college and 4 years after college, you may need more like 16 years or 12 years of experience after college. So there's a lot of different opportunities. There's a lot of different ways it can go depending on where you're coming from, your level of experience, your area of expertise, where you want to work. But in general, if you know where you're going, talking to the board at that stage is probably the easiest way to go about it. You will learn what are these steps that I need to take. We actually have someone in our company that graduating from India and did their master's here. So the process is going to look a little different if you graduated from a different country and then just came here and wanted to work, or had a undergrad and master's from different country and tried to come here. So there's almost an infinite number of
Yeah.
possibilities. But the best way is just reach out to the board and they will hopefully help you.
Yeah. Explain your situation. Here's what you got. Here's where you're trying to go.
Yeah.
And go from there. What organizations have left the biggest impact on your journey?
I mean, Engineers Without Borders, it's interesting to me coming from Colombia and seeing all of this stuff kind of firsthand, like problems with water, poverty, all of this stuff. And knowing that I'm using my skills to help these developing countries feels amazing. And I love doing it. And probably will continue doing it to the degree I can. Obviously, I am not a student anymore. I don't have that much time to put into it, but I still like to be involved and maybe help a little bit more with donations and everything. But EWB is pretty high in that list. ASCE, so the American Society of Civil Engineers, and SEI, the Structural Engineering Institute, are the two kind of professional organizations that I volunteer the most with. And in this organization is more in terms of helping kind of other engineers, helping students, helping sometimes helping myself learn technical skills, leadership skills, all this stuff, and being involved in kind of the future of the profession in general. Because these organizations are the ones that are writing the codes that we design with. They are thinking 20, 30, 40, 50 years ahead on what the industry is going to look like. So being part of those conversations means a lot, and it's really cool to sit at the table with the president of ASCE and the CEO of big companies in the US, and just being able to be part of those conversations, it's pretty cool.
Yeah. And can you be a part of those organizations as students and then move into professional, or are they all straight professionals?
So ASCE has a really big student presence in, I want to say, all universities. They have tons and tons of students. That's how most people get into it, because it's basically a club at university. They have the concrete canoe. I think they are getting the steel bridge back from AISC, but I don't remember. And they have a few more like student competitions that people are part of. And honestly, those are a great resume builder when you're a student and wanted to find a job. A lot of people look at those volunteering, because when you graduate and you become a professional member of these organizations, you will be looking at people and students that are part of those organizations if you enjoyed it and you volunteer as a student. So it's a big plus. I think it has 300,000 or 400,000 members in the US, and there's a lot more internationally as well. And overall, it's just a great way to build your resume in college. And after you graduate, I think your resume is still growing with you and your learning experience. And again, networking with people and getting to know other engineers across the board. And the beauty is they're not in ASE, they're not all structural engineers. There's transportation that we were talking about before,
Mm-hmm.
geotech, water. So there is everything within civil engineering is in this organization. So you get to meet all those people.
Yeah, because I always feel the AEC industry overall is more about relationships than the design. I know I advocate that more to architects because they get their head wrapped around the design side, but it's the relationships and the people side that really fosters your growth, where projects come from, what you learn, how you learn. The organizations are a huge part of it.
Yeah, and in a project, especially if you're in the building industry, you probably know that a structural engineer or electrical engineer are not gonna work in a vacuum. They have
Hmm.
everything is you move a beam 6 inches one way, and you have to move HVAC, you have to move electrical, you have to be communicating with all these different people at the same time. So knowing and understanding a little bit of those industries within civil engineering, outside of civil engineering, when you're making design, that's gonna just make you a better engineer overall. If you know that moving this beam 6 inches is gonna affect these other things, and these are the ramifications. Maybe I need to find a different way before I just move it and cause a lot more problems down the road.
Yeah, or knowing to just reach out and talk to the rest of the team on something. Like if you do need to move something and understand there's implications to it, it's like, hey, I need to do this, and it's going to react, and then have a conversation with it, and not just move it and not worry about anybody else's stuff.
And
So,
it's a lot easier to come to those meetings and conversations knowing what the consequences are and say, hey, I need to move these. I know it's going to cause these and these problems to your design. Let's work on it together rather than say, hey, I'm going to move these. You guys figure out what needs to happen to make it work.
yeah, and be like, not my problem. Good luck. Yep. And I always like wrapping up my podcast with this question, and it's, what advice do you have for young professionals starting their career?
So I think starting, there's a few things that I usually tell people. So one of them is say yes more than you say no. So if someone reaches out to you, hey, I want to have this conversation, say yes. You have a lot more time when you're young, when you are starting your career, especially at work. If someone comes with a task, even if you don't know 100% how to do it, saying yes more than saying no will lead to more opportunities, more doors will open. You will network with more people, and I think that's, if there's one thing to take away, is just getting involved in these organizations, saying yes to all these opportunities. That will grow your network, that will grow your resume, the people you know, and hopefully bring great career opportunities down the road. You never know, when you want to switch jobs, when you want to switch industries, when you switch complete careers, having those opportunities down the road, I think, is a great way to start building that foundation right now, saying yes to these opportunities and networking um, frequently.
Yeah. And I think you also made an important statement, is saying yes more than saying no. So it's not saying yes to everything, and understanding like you do have boundaries or constraints. The time is finite. We can't change time. So watching to make
Yeah,
sure you're not overdoing it too. So
absolutely. Yeah.
yeah. And if anybody has any additional questions to reach out to you, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
The best way, probably LinkedIn. I'm pretty active there. So if you search my name, I'm sure we'll have a link somewhere. Um, the website has a lot of resources. That's where the podcast is hosted. So every 110 episodes that I've done right now are there. Talk with people and connecting with them. I also have a few courses on the website and some free resources for students that are thinking about taking the PE and the FE exam. That are great to kind of get people started, and if they want more help, there's some paid courses and some coaching that I'm most happy to help others. And like I said, I really enjoyed this whole podcasting, helping engineers, and that's why I do a lot of volunteering as well. That's how some of those courses came to be, just literally from my experience going through the exam, and maybe doing a little more unconventionally, not taking a course. It was through the pandemic, so I didn't have like a study group, so I had to do a lot of these by myself. But I have always just been super interested in learning techniques and all of that stuff that I applied and sharing the course. So reach out if you have any questions related to the PE, the FE exam, or any really career development stuff. I love talking about that stuff. Um, anyone. So reach out. The website is luisfelipeduque.com. If you look for my name, I think on LinkedIn, you'll be able to find all that information.
Yep. And I'll leave access to your website down below in the show notes. So if you guys need some quick links, and I'll also try to throw some links from the organizations we talked about today as well. So thank you, Luis, so much for taking the time to speak with me today.
Absolutely. Thank you. This was a lot of fun.
I hope you enjoyed our discussion today. Check out the description below for any resources, links, and contact information we discussed. Did you like the conversation today? Is there something you'd like to know more about or a topic I should cover? Leave me a comment below and I will see what I can do to best answer your questions. And if you haven't done so already, subscribe to the channel. It does really help others be able to find this resource to have larger conversations. So leave me a comment and subscribe. I really appreciate your support.